Kia ora and welcome to episode 33 of Bridge Talks Business with Milford. Tomorrow's budget day and we know there's going to be no lolly scrambles, but we also know that we will still come away with a structural deficit. This country, like many others around the world, still grappling with huge borrowing hikes post-COVID, and without spending cuts, that means deficit. This affects markets. Public debt impacts our private earnings. So ahead of the big reveal, we'll look at how and why. First, though, here's your top 5 business bits from the last 7 days. Coming in at number 1, Trump's big, beautiful bill takes centre stage as trade deals fade into the background for now. It's big on stimulus, tax cuts, little regard for debt, which, of course, has investors a bit worried. Number 2, the rating agency Moody's downgrading US debt last week, specifically calling out concerns about this trajectory. Whilst this is not really new news, it is yet another voice calling out, hey, the emperor has no clothes. Number 3, US arms deals across the Middle East gave markets a shot in the arm last week with promises of purchases of US planes and semiconductors. Number 4, this week investors expecting a rate cut out of Australia from the RBA. Inflation has just about made it into the target band there with the help of government subsidies, but there has been a lot of political pressure on the RBA to cut too. So it'll be interesting to see how the outlook is categorised there. And number 5, elsewhere, we will get an update on the state of global industrial confidence from the regular monthly surveys. Will we see an improvement in confidence as tariff pauses take effect? Right, it is time for this week's feature interview, and we're talking deficits, government deficits. What do they mean for markets? What do they mean for investors? What do they mean for us, really? I'm joined this week by Brad Litt, who is a credit trading manager at Milford. And just a reminder, this segment is informational only and should not be considered financial advice. Brad, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, good to be here.
Good to have you on. All right, let's go. This is not the first time governments have been in debt or run deficits. Let's go back to paint a bit of a picture to post-GFC, post sort of 2008 when English and Key got into government. What was the debt situation like for us then?
Yeah, post the GFC, the governments were implementing austerity. That was to curb these deficits that they had and just slow down the build-up of government debt. In New Zealand, this was done through reduced expenses as a percentage of the GDP. They moved from about 35% to 25%. That was done by about 2015. The US, they slashed a lot of discretionary spending. It was circa $1 trillion over 10 years. In Australia, fiscal consolidation was achieved there by lower spending, but also increased revenue take.
Which is not the track we're going down at the moment, austerity.
No. So austerity measures obviously were slow in growth.
Yeah. So to explain that to us, that the government was pulling back, which meant that the wider economy felt it too.
Correct.
Does that mean that governments should spend more when we're in situations like this?
I mean, that is kind of a good question you can ask. And I'd say that governments might have learned that moving out of the GFC, there's pretty slow, sluggish growth, austerity measures, meaning that this economic growth was a bit slower. And you're kind of looking through COVID and seeing the large increase in the fiscal spend, increased government borrowing, reduced interest rates, all led to higher demand, increased growth, but obviously that fueled inflation, and we end up having to increase interest rates further down the track.
Yeah, and we all know this story, right? We've been living it and feeling it. Can you just paint a picture of how bad the debt has got for? Let's start with New Zealand post COVID. We can't. It seems like once you've started the spending, you can't stop it almost.
That is correct. It's very hard to reduce once you've started. You see that in New Zealand. It's a good example. In the last update in December, the Treasury increased their forecast for their debt issuance over the 4 years for 20 billion. So it's gone from 126 billion to 146 billion. So it's a pretty material increase.
And what about Australia? How are they looking?
Australia, they just released their pre-election update. And they increased their spending for this year, about to finish, to 100 billion, and next year 150 billion. So that's a pretty large increase. It's circa 2% of GDP. As kind of comparison, in Germany, obviously they've got a large defence programs which they're running now, that's about 1.5% of GDP. So a pretty material increase there.
Wow. What about the United States? And this is before we even talk about Trump's big, beautiful bill, which is going to, probably have the effect of ramping up borrowing even more. How are they looking?
So this bill was only just recently passed, and it's expected somewhere between 3.3 trillion to 5.3 trillion of debt to be added to the US government. So if you think that's about 7 to 8% of an annual deficit of GDP per year over the next 10 years, so a pretty material increase. So the fiscal trajectory is definitely deteriorating.
Yeah, it's crazy. What about because remember Elon Musk and Doge were meant to come in and cut all this spending. But actually, as you mentioned earlier, it's really hard. It's like a drug. You almost get addicted to it. They haven't even really made a dent on what they thought they'd do.
No, I think it was forecasted, they initially announced about 2 trillion of savings. I think recent estimates have been about 165 billion. So quite a material decrease from the initial number of 2 trillion, but also relative to the spending that they're forecasting through for this big, beautiful bill that you've mentioned.
Yeah. Brad, how do deficits what impact do they have on markets? Does it depend what type of debt or what type of deficit we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it depends where they're at, whether these deficits are considered to be structural or unsustainable. But first of all, will be higher inflation through increased government spend, crowding out private investment. The increase in demand with no offsetting increase in supply will naturally lead to higher prices, and we saw that post the kind of COVID period. Secondly, higher government yields, bond yields. This is obviously a result of additional government bond issuance. Thirdly, depreciating currency, and this can kind of depend on whether the deficit's considered to be sustainable or not. Fourth, and we're probably seeing this with the US more recently, just the burgeoning cost of financing this debt, interest cost. And you saw last week one of the rating agencies lowering the credit rating of the US government. So, and that's also another potential implication for markets.
It's like when you get addicted to fast food and you just can't stop doing it, and then the more you chew through, the more expensive it becomes.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're feeling in New Zealand at the moment.
Yeah. So let's talk and finish on New Zealand. So we've got a budget coming this week. We know that the government's trying to turn our spending track from operational to capital expenditure. That must be welcome news for markets. Or do they pay? Is that an important factor for them, or what?
I mean, yeah, obviously the nature of the spending is important, and they have actually announced quite a few measures, a $9 billion increase spending defence, although that's supposedly going to be taken away from other projects which have been listed already. So, yeah, in theory, it is a good thing, but let's see how that pans out.
And what about the future for this big, beautiful bill? What do you think that will have more of an impact on markets than what the tariff schmozzle did?
Maybe. I mean, it's going to be a different impact on markets. Obviously, the tariffs were pretty quick. It was only 6 to 8 weeks ago that Trump were proposing these tariffs, and we've kind of come back. And if you look at most risk markets, whereas on the tariffs, on the deficit side, that seems like it's a bit more of a slow burn.
A longer term issue problem.
A longer term issue for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the US government hasn't actually got a reduction in their deficit forecasts until 2028.
Brad, thank you very much for coming and explaining it to me. I really appreciate your time.
Cheers, thank you for that.
That was Brad Litt. He's a credit trading manager at Milford, talking about deficits, the different types of borrowing that governments do, the different types of spending that they can do, and how that can affect the markets. Don't forget, we've got the budget coming up tomorrow here in New Zealand. We're also going to get a bunch of manufacturing data out of the United States, and we'll have the Reserve Bank of Australia's decision on their cash rate. We'll see you next week. Don't forget you can like, follow, and subscribe this podcast wherever you like to. See you then.